Hi, in this tutorial we see component usage window, interface node and external context mapping. First, coming to the concept of component usage window. As I said, the functionality of pop-up window and the component usage window both are the same. Both work like pop-up. The difference over here is, for the component usage window, we use component usage window when we are trying to call the views of other objects in the current object as a pop-up. For example, calling the view of component A in component B as a pop-up is nothing but component usage window. First, let's see how to start working with the functionality of component usage window. Creating a component, OSG component usage is the name of the component. Okay, component usage. Creating the object under the local object. The best practice would be activate the component first. And the point over here, whenever we are trying to call the views or the methods, or when we are trying to share data between two different components, then the first point is that we have to define used components under using component. That is, first, whenever we are trying to call the views or the methods or the data of the other component, then first define used component under the using component. So what are we going to do? Say for example, I'm trying to use the component called OSG display. Define the component which we are going to reuse in the component has to be defined first over here. And to reuse that component, we use some component username, which is nothing but an alias name. For example, taking an example of object-oriented, we call an instance. Generally, in ABAP, when we try to call the methods of the class, what we do, we create an instance to the class, which is nothing but which comes the same point of view over here. Here, I say the name as component usage. It means that we have given some alias name to the component, and using this particular component username, we will be communicating to this particular component. When you click on enter, you can see the description that was given to the component, and when you click on save, under the component, we see the component usages which is created. Under the component usage, we can see what are the other list of components that are being used in the current component. Now, within a view, I shall define, I'll create an attribute, say, I'll create an attribute, that is, for example, name, type string, and I'll define layout with an input field. Just creating an input field UI element, and under the input field UI element, we have a property called value, and this value property should be binded with the name attribute. My concept is that when an input field has an event called on enter, when we click on the on enter of the input field, I need to see the view of the display component as a pop-up. So I just given an action as pop-up, and within this pop-up method, we write a logic. And what is the logic here? So we are trying to call the view of the display component as a pop-up, and for this we use code wizard, and in the general tab we have an option called generate pop-up. Under the component use, when we click on F4, you can see the component usage of this component, and I'm selecting main window. The main WSG display is the main window. Only with the help of a window we can call the views. So selecting the WSG display window, and when I say continue, and the name of the method to work with component usage window is that create underscore window for component usage. Parameters to be passed. Interface view name. Interface view name is nothing but name of the window. Technically we call it as an interface view name when you're trying to call the window of one component in the other component. And a component usage name is nothing but the alias name what we had defined when we define the component under the use tab. And now let's activate the component first, and let us test the application now. Let's create our type application. So component usage. And now as there's some constraint in my system with the access, I'm just copying the network, copying the URL and executing in the Firefox. In the Mozilla, and now we can see an input field. When I click on enter of this particular input field, we see the screen of WSG display component which is called as a pop-up. This is how we work with the functionality of component usage window. And now the next set of functionality is that this is a selected record. Based on the record what we select, I need the selected record material number need to be displayed, need to be set in the input field. Now here we are trying to share data between two different components. This is view of component A, which is a view of display component, and this is a view of component usage. Now what are we trying to do? We are trying to share data between two different components. Here comes into the picture interface controller. Interface controller comes into the picture. The importance of interface controller is to communicate between two different components, either to share the data or business logic. When I say business logic, say component A, display component has one method, and if you want to call the method of component A in component B, then we take help of interface controller. Now, in order to share data between two different components, as we said, we take help of interface controller. Now, the other point is that we are aware to share the data, we take help of, we generally use context. Context is the source where we share data between two different controllers. But when coming up to the interface controller, when we see, we cannot edit interface controller. Only when we create a node, only when there is an availability of the node in the interface controller, only then the data can be accessed or can be shared. Now, when we do not have an option of creating or editing interface controller, then how do we create node in the interface controller and how do we share the data? Here is a point. In order to create node in the interface controller, we generally create interface node in the component controller. Only within the component controller, we can declare a node as an interface node. For example, if you see within the component controller, when we create a node only in the component controller, creating a node in the component controller, I say for example sales, and here the node is having a property called interface node. When we declare the interface node as yes, then this particular node becomes as an interface node. It means that the node which gets created within the interface controller. Say for example, I say VBAP, and let's add 2 or 3 fields from the VBAP structure. So we are selecting few fields, and here if you see when we declare a node as an interface node, we see a different symbol, and when we go to interface controller, in the interface controller you see the node. So it means that in case if you wanted to declare a node in the interface controller, then we can declare the node as an interface node has to be declared in the component controller, and only within the component controller you can declare the node as an interface node. Now what we did, now as per our requirement, we have to declare a node in the display component, because we are trying to share the data of the display component within the current component. This is the data of your display view. The data of the display component, we are trying to share the data of this within the current component. So within the display component, we'll declare a node in the component controller, and I had declared the node by the name selected, and this selected node, as we declared it as an interface node, this selected node will be available within the interface controller. The record what we are going to select, that only selected data I am trying to share over here. And the next what we did is, within the main view, we had defined an internal context mapping. The selected node of the component controller is defined in the view controller, which is called main view. And here we call this as internal context mapping. The mapping which is happening between component controller and the view controller is nothing but internal context mapping. Within the layout, when we had a table, and table has an event called lead selection. Table has an event called lead selection. In the lead selection, when we select a record, then the selected record we are trying to set to the interface node. So here in the first phase, what are we doing? We are reading the data which is selected by the user, and the selected node material number, we are setting data to the selected node. This is how we set data to the attribute. Okay. Now what we have to do? Now in the current component, in the component controller, The node which is available within the component controller or the interface controller of display component. We have to access the node selected of display component within the current component. To do that, we click on the button called controller usage. When you click on this particular button, it shows you the list of interface controllers available within the component. Now we have to use interface controller of YSG display component. Select the interface controller and continue. Now in the right hand side of the component controller, we see interface controller of YSG display component. Now just drag and drop the node display onto the component controller context, and we call this particular mapping as external context mapping. We call this as external context mapping, the mapping which is defined between interface controller of object A with component controller or window controller or view controller of object B. It's called as external context mapping. External context mapping is defined to share data between two different components. The other point is external context mapping. To share data between two different components, we define external context mapping. External context mapping is also called as cross-component context mapping. Cross-component context mapping. External context mapping is also called as cross-component context mapping. And now, what we do, the data of the selected record data is available within the Mappler attribute. Now what we do, we define an internal context mapping. So when I say internal context mapping, the mapping which is defined between component controller and the view controller of the same component, we call it as internal context mapping. Drag and drop selected node onto the view controller context. And now what I do is, I'll rebind this input field with the attribute Mappler of the selected node, because Mappler attribute has a data. Save this, and now let us activate the component. And now let us refresh the session. Click on enter. And then I'm selecting the record 4970, which has material M12. When I click on the close of this window, you can see the material M12 which is set. This is how we work with the concept of component usage window and the concept of external context mapping. And to share data between two different components, first we have to define a node as an instance node, and then we have to define an external context mapping between two different components. Thank you.